So a little while back, Devon added a pretty interesting exercise to his training routine. It was clear that the focus of his training was still his more primary lifts like pronation and rising through elbow flexion, so I didn't think all too much of this lift. But recently he posted another video of him training this lift in the build-up to Levon, and that brought it back to my attention. The lift that I'm talking about is Devon's grip lift. This one. Devon posted this video on his Instagram a day or two ago, and we've seen him doing this off and on a decent amount in his training circuits, but today I wanted to talk about the importance or the reason behind this lift. And honestly, I didn't really have a great idea of why Devon would even be training this exercise until I found this video of him giving a brief explanation of it.
I didn't used to do this exercise a lot, but I do quite enjoy it now. I think it's a good just general developer for the hand, wrist. In arm wrestling, I think it has good technical application. When you're in a strap, just the ability to squeeze. Even if your wrist does get bent back, you can still kind of row maybe with a tight hand.
So I think that there are basically two components to this exercise from what Devon said. He portrayed it as a good general forearm developer, and that makes sense to me for a specific reason we'll get into in a second. But I thought that the second component of the lift was potentially more interesting, but also a bit confusing. Sounds to me like what Devon is talking about is basically having some sort of anchor left in the area of cupping, even if your wrist is totally blown out. So instead of trying to bend your wrist, you could simply squeeze onto your opponent's thumb, and this would prevent them from climbing any further to a certain degree. You would then have some sort of connection in the match to apply a lat dragging pressure. I'm assuming that Devon is using this 1-inch handle to mimic holding onto someone's thumb, and this immediately reminded me of good old Crazy George. Crazy George has the ability to basically top roll his opponents underneath their own hand by grabbing onto their thumb and not letting go and top rolling his opponent through their own thumb. This allows George to still have a solid connection to apply power into the match, even if his opponent is totally over the top of him and has full hand control. So if Devon is training this movement with that partially in mind, that is very interesting. Although it does seem unlikely that this technique would work very well when gripping up with someone who has a similar size hand as you. But I think the first component Devon mentioned about this exercise has a much better opportunity of being useful for a majority of pullers, and that is the way that this exercise can nearly isolate your finger flexion. Now, it's not really training your fingers all the way out to the fingertips, which would be more sport specific, but we can see that the first joint in the finger has an active range of motion in this lift, whereas the wrist does not. In this way, this exercise is a very unique one. Most of the time, when trying to train your fingertips in arm wrestling, you end up with an exercise that has an active range of motion on your wrist joint, but your fingers just stay locked in the same place throughout the movement. So I think that this grip lift from Devon could be something to look into if you wanted a way to isolate your finger flexion and train it isotonically at the same time. Or as a far superior reason, you could train this exercise if you want to be just like Crazy George.